Okay. Are you recording yet? Oh, you are. Sweet. All right. Good evening, everybody here at Dark Star Magick, and also good evening to everybody online who's watching. My name is Erik Arneson. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing memory palaces and magical sigils. So to start off with a little bit of introduction, I am a longtime student of tarot and the occult. I started getting into it in the 80s. I started sort of doing ceremonial magic pretty seriously about 25 years ago. And the art of memory is something that I've also had a long passion with. I started lecturing on the art of memory in 2004, mostly at Masonic lodges and for Masonic organizations. And then if you're not familiar with it, I also run the Arnemancy website, which is a blog and a podcast. And you can see the address there down at the bottom of the screen. Yes, it might be a little out of focus, but it's arnemancy.com. Okay, so the class tonight, I'm going to cover the art of memory briefly. I'm going to try to rush through it. Most of the time when I lecture on the art of memory, it's a lecture that goes on for far too long. So I've tried to condense it down and get it sort of small. We're going to talk about what sigils are and what image magic is. Then we're going to talk about divination and how that interacts with memory. We're going to then talk about putting them all together, which I think is the fun part and should hopefully be something that could provide you with a little bit of a creative boost in your own magical or occult practice. I always start off with these memory-related classes by sharing the hymn for Mnemosyne. I keep a copy of this in my pocket all the time. But in addition, today is Mercurialia, so I would like to say that this lecture is dedicated to Mercury, and since we're doing it in a store, which is perfect for Mercury, and so Mnemosyne, Mercury, both of them are cool. I want to start off a little bit with changing the way that you think about learning. Socrates had this concept of knowledge and the nature of the soul. Basically, the soul is there's some spot over here. The soul is, in Socrates' point of view, is immortal. It emerges from the divine. It re-emerges with the divine after death, or perhaps transfers into a new life or something of that nature. And since it has this divine nature, it has access to all of the knowledge in creation, in the cosmos, all the knowledge that the creator would have access to. Socrates sort of said that there's no way for humans to create new knowledge or invent new knowledge because everything that exists is part of creation. Instead, he said, what happens when the soul is forced to incarnate into a mortal body, it causes a level of trauma that causes forgetfulness, that cuts the soul off from all of this divine knowledge. Because of this, he looked at learning as a type of recollection. Learning was the soul remembering. Learning was the soul gaining access to the divine knowledge that it always has had the right to access, but has been separated from through the trauma of the physical world. So to him, he called learning anamnesis, or the remembering of the soul, and this changed the way. This altered the way that memory and learning and sensation were looked at in the ancient world, and all the way up through the Renaissance, up until the Protestant Reformation and the scientific revolution. But when you're looking at using memory and magic of any sort together, it helps a lot to remember that the memory is is a divine thing. It's a divine aspect of us, and accessing memories or learning, even learning new things, helps the soul become fuller and wholer and closer to divinity. And this is important because we're going to be talking about the art of memory, and the art of memory involves a lot of work. You know, it's not necessarily an easy process or an easy technique. It requires daily practice. It requires building memory palaces. It requires learning new techniques for looking at things. And we have a tough time with this in the modern world because we're so entrenched in a materialistic scientific society that we like to think that, like, oh, memory is physical. Memory is stored somewhere physically in the body. Memory is stored somewhere physically in the brain. And maybe we'll someday discover that that's entirely true. You know, biologists and medical science are making efforts towards discovering where memory is physically stored in the body. But as magicians, you don't work with the body in that way. You work with the soul. So this is not a physical science. This is a science of the soul, or a practice of the soul. So you have to kind of like separate your understanding of memory from the empirical paradigm of physical science in order for a lot of these techniques to make sense. So the memory palace method, or the method of loci, is a very, very, very ancient technique. And I'm going to give a short description of how it works, but I will tell you that I don't have enough time nor slides to give a really, really in-depth explanation of how you can build an entire memory palace and do all that kind of stuff on your own. We'll talk a little bit about memory and the creation of images and that sort of thing in a bit, and a few of the rules for memory palaces, but if you really want an in-depth tutorial on creating a memory palace, one of the best things to do is to get on YouTube and look up like memory champions and how they use memory palaces. Like, you can find tutorials of these nerdy people taking you on tours of their apartment and creating memory palaces in their apartment. All of the techniques that they use are still the same, are basically inherited from this ancient technique. The ancient technique, we know that it probably started somewhere around the 4th or 5th century BC. It was a very common technique that was taught to almost everybody in the Western world up until about the middle of the 1500s. The invention of the printing press kind of killed it, drove it out of use. And the Protestant Reformation, you know, drove the nails in the coffin with its rejection of images and idolatry, and like really helped remove the imaginal memory palace method from the Western canon of education. That's why we didn't learn this stuff in school. But we have a lot of like really beautiful descriptions of people using memory palaces and using memory techniques in the old days. And what this usually entailed, and the reason I picked this particular picture is it's kind of perfect for it. You would be in a classical building, a temple, a civic building, something of that nature, that would have like alcoves and spaces, and some of them might have statues, some of them might have artwork in them. And you would travel around, you would visit this building daily, and you would memorize this building and have it so that it was almost second nature to walk through it in your imagination, in your memory, in your mind. You would be able to go and visit this building. But you'd strip out all of the statues. So like in this, every single place where there's a statue, you just have that little pedestal underneath, no statue there. You would take the same route every time. So your journey through your memory palace would be static and in one direction, and you would visit the same places in the same sequence over and over and over again until you just had it locked in. Once you do that, you have a memory palace that's ready to be used for memorization. The way you would memorize things is you would travel around your memory palace in that order, and in every one of the alcoves, which are the loci, the locations, you would place an image that you would create that would evoke your memory and help you remember something in sequence. You could use this for memorizing poetry, for memorizing speeches, for memorizing scripture, for memorizing grocery lists, for memorizing rules of architecture or mathematics or anything of that nature. The memory palace is only limited truly by your imagination. And we have so by the Renaissance, so Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, who was a famous 16th century Renaissance magician and polymath, talked about inner perception, like the inner world, the perception of the divine light and the perception of the inner world was almost seen as like more important than the perception of the physical world, especially since the perception of the physical world is pretty much a lie. And he goes through these various methods of inner perception and sort of ranks them. The first is common sense, which is responsible for collecting impressions and information from the exterior senses, from sight, smell, sound, touch, all those things, and uses those impressions to create an image. Then the imaginative power is the second inner perception, which inner perceptive faculty, and this retains images and passes them along to the third sense, which is fantasy and the power of thought. This sense accepts images and then both perceives and judges the reason and nature of images. So basically, common sense collects external stimuli, transforms them into something, an image that your soul can perceive. The imaginative power is there to kind of solidify that image and then pass it along to fantasy and the power of thought, which takes that image and judges it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it fun? Is it miserable? Like all of those sorts of things. The final inner sense is memory, which serves to both protect and store images, but it also has the power to connect images together, to judge them, and to distinguish between images. So memory was really seen as a method of perception, which is totally tied to that Plotinus quote that I did not say. Memory and sensation are not passive, but power. And what Plotinus meant by that is that your imagination, your inner senses, your imagination, your ability to perceive images in your mind and perceive memories, it's not a passive thing, but it is an active thing that you are meant to take control of, that you are meant to be in control of. All right, we're going to talk about another Renaissance weirdo now, Giordano Bruno, who wrote a book called The Shadows of Ideas, De Umbris Idearum. Bruno was a Dominican monk. He lived from 1548 to 1600. He was kicked out of the Dominican order for studying the works of Desiderius Erasmus. He tends to be pretty badly understood these days because he had a certain subtlety to his approach that makes him a little difficult to understand. He talked a lot about memory techniques and also magic. He mixed up like Neoplatonism and Hermeticism into its own sort of solar religion that really got him in trouble and eventually burned at the stake. And he believed that ideas were basically a type of image, and it's through ideas that the soul can be formed and developed. Bruno didn't believe that the inner perception of memory and imagination was anything supernatural, but that it was natural and that we were meant to be practicing it. But he also had a really different understanding of the line between what material and spiritual were that is difficult to wrap your head around when you are a modern thinker. He wrote, ideas are not only part of living life and developing reason. Illumination, life-bringing, and unification, conforming to superior agencies. These are the methods by which one develops intelligence and memory of the forms. And that memory of the forms line is interesting because it harkens back to Socrates and Plato's teachings that that the forms sort of exist as an archetypal like supra reality that defines everything that we live in. So by gaining memory of the forms, you are gaining a type of escape from Plato's cave sort of thing. Bruno used a little bit of different terminology, and I will try to not use his terminology, but just in case, when he talks about a subject, he's talking about the location of a memory location, like a Loki, and an adject is a memory image. His rules for subjects stated that you should focus on speed and confidence in recall. So when you are creating your memory palace, you need to be very comfortable with it. He said that these locations should be well lit. They should be large enough to hold a human figure with its arms outstretched. They shouldn't be too similar, so they should be kind of varied, but they should have enough space. And that you can, if you're having trouble holding on to the distinctiveness of individual locations, you can add or subtract things from them in your memory to help make them, to aid in the visualization of them. Overall, he emphasized that daily practice was key to mastering the art of memory. And he has a quote in one of his books that says, if you start to build a memory palace and you work on it every day, it should be ready to use within the space of a lunar month. So it just takes about a month of practice, and then you've got a memory palace ready to go. He also has rules for images. We'll get into some better rules for images later on, but Bruno really kind of sets the stage for this. And now he was building, of course, on a long tradition. The Dominicans had a lot of memory practices that were just sort of taught as being part of a monastic order. A lot of them, we'll look at an example of one later on, but many of them were made to like memorize the parts of the Bible or memorize like scripture and things like that. One of the rules that you come across over and over and over again is that images should be striking and dramatic. They should excite the emotions. This makes them much easier to recall. Images should be endowed with motion, because there's this concept that things that can move on their own, in Hermeticism, at least in the Corpus Hermeticum, or maybe in the Asclepius, said that things that can move on their own are ensouled, or have a measure of soul in them. He also believed that your images and the locations should be related somehow. So, don't make a memory palace of the Star Trek Enterprise and fill it with stormtroopers. And he also believed that discretion, determination, and ordination, that means that they should be discrete. The images should be discrete from each other. Determination means that you need to fix them firmly, right? You need to have a really good picture of them. And then ordination is just like you keep them in order. You walk through your memory palace in order. When you're doing it, when you're using it, and you need to recall something specific, you can zoom through and fast forward, but just do it in order. It'll keep your memory palace more useful. So a lot of the techniques that we're going to talk about tonight depart a little bit from some of the Renaissance rules. You can do a lot of different things with palaces. We live in a country that doesn't have the same kind of like intricate medieval architecture that Europe does. So you're going to have a hard time finding a building that you're familiar with that has the same kind of like alcove structure and that sort of thing as a medieval cathedral. So when you're building a palace, it doesn't necessarily need to be a building. And in fact, Bruno himself gives examples of palaces made out of tables and skies and things like that. You can use gardens. You can use a walk along a river. You can use a forest that you're familiar with. When you're starting out, it really helps for it to be a real place so that you can spend time there, like memorizing it and not having to worry about making stuff up. The memory garden idea is a very, very old one. It was used by Augustine, and he mentioned it in his Confessions. He talks about the gardens of his mind, wherein he meets and interacts with God. So memory gardens are also very old. As you get a little bit better with it, you can start to and you start to understand a little bit more. Future memory palaces don't necessarily need to be real places. They can be legendary places. They can be completely imaginary. One of the things that I've seen a lot of discussion of, and which I've played around with a little bit, is if you ever have dreams about the same building or the same house or something like that, you can pull memories of dreams to build memory palaces. You can have purpose-built memory palaces that can be, like, especially if you go along with something legendary or imaginary, these palaces can be written down, they can be sung, they can be physically embodied in objects and artwork, such as the amazing book, The Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, which has a memory palace-like structure to it. They can be encoded in ritual. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And they can, and thus memory palaces can actually sometimes be passed on to others. These sorts of purpose-built transferable memory palaces are best for like really long-term workings, like hyper sigils or lodge situations. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Oh, my next slide, lodges as memory palaces. So lodges, and I don't mean just Masonic lodges, I mean like OTO lodges, I mean like any sort of body where you have initiations or confirmations or anything of that nature where you're walking around and doing things in specific places. These are purpose-built memory palaces. A lot of the ones that we have nowadays have their roots in early Masonic and tradecraft organizations, which used the art of memory in order to encode their lessons and their trade and the virtues that went along with their trade in the symbols that were used in their lodges or buildings or whatever. So any sort of ritual that involves floor work, motion, or space can be transformed into a sort of mnemonic journey through a memory palace. These sorts of things are perfect for shared symbols and magical work, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But if any of you have ever been through any sort of initiation of any sort, you can possibly think back at it and think back on it. Even if you've like read, like Rigardi's big black book of the Golden Dawn, like that, the Golden Dawn stuff is all memory palace stuff. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about creating images, because the two things that you're going to need to be able to do if you're going to be combining memory palaces and sigils is you're going to need to be able to create images, and you're going to need to be able to create sigils. And I kind of always assume that almost everybody who's a practitioner has at least created a chaos magic sigil once or twice. So I'm going to focus mostly on the creating of images. These are some rules that help your images stick around. They need to be vivid. That means give them color, give them something very sensory rich. Give them smells or touch or sound or something like that. Your imagination and your memory don't need to be limited to sight, and in fact, it's probably not. We have lots of research that show that smells evoke memories quite well. They should invoke an emotion, and this is one of the things that I think can be sort of a hang-up for a lot of people when they're starting to work with magical images. But there should be an emotion that is kind of strong, like humor, fear, joy, disgust, even lust. Like all of these sorts of emotions that can be very strong. Like they are amazing for creating images. There should be some sort of logical association with the information they represent, and some of these others, exaggeration in particular. Like Visual puns tend to be really helpful. For instance, one of the first images that I created when I was learning the art of memory was an image for frankincense, which involved Frankenstein's monster with a comically large, oversized nose where he was sniffing things. Frankincense. Like as a visual pun, it worked for me. I still have that in my head after over 20 years. So exaggeration can act as a trigger. So like the overlarge nose on Frankenstein's monster, for instance, is an exaggerated feature. It's also important to limit the complexity. Find a balance between simplicity and complexity, because complex images are harder to recall. You don't need to make them too overly detailed. If you find yourself doing that, you might end up having images that are too close together. You're going to have difficulty holding on to fine details, and they might get mixed up with each other. And then lastly, like one of the most important things about images is that frequently they are very personal. So a personal connection can make an image more meaningful and easier to remember. Personal relevance boosts memorability. As you go along, especially if you're working with a specific system or a specific symbol set, it can be helpful to also develop a memory alphabet where you have very specific symbols that are tied to letters. You basically need like one symbol per letter, and you can use these in your images to help remember like really specific words. Memory alphabets tend to be much better when they are thematic, like they all belong to the same theme. Like this is a monastic memory alphabet, and you can see things like, I don't know what all of the stuff is supposed to be, but wait, biblioteca. Well, anyhow, as you can see, there's a lot of like Catholic symbolism and imagery in here. A lot of things that monks and priests would have been interacting with on a daily basis, and they are somehow tied to either numbers or alphabets. So that's one way to do it. And then another way, which I am just going to show you a picture of, but will not attempt to explain because none of us are as nerdy and smart as Giordano Bruno, is using a memory wheel. Bruno, this is super ridiculous. So Bruno developed this memory wheel that allowed him, in his mind, he would sort of turn it like a secret decoder ring, and it would come up with different combinations. And he had like a pre-built image for every single 3-letter combination on this wheel, which gave him this incredible, library of, what is it, like 30 to the third memory images that he was just able to pull out of his hat at any time. This is like super advanced. Don't worry about it. You may never have to use it. But if you do get really into memory systems, online you will find people using a system called, I don't remember what the exact name of the system is, but it's something like subject verb object, where they combine actions and objects and things together to make new memory images. Basically, there are a lot of techniques that get used. It's going to take some practice, like I said, and luckily there are plenty of pre-built magical images. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But next we're going to bop on over to sigils. So sigils are basically like any kind of symbol used in magic. Since you are here in Dark Star Magick, I am going to assume that you've seen like, the Key of Solomon or the Lesser Key of Solomon with all the goetic demon seals and things like that. Those are all sigils. Sigils are also things created by like various different Renaissance or modern methods. Like Austin Osman Spare has his method of like combining letters to make sigils, which is very common in chaos magic. There's systems like the Ike Bakar, which are used to transform letters into angular shapes that are then combined to make sigils. But a sigil is generally like any symbol used in magic. I apologize for repeating myself. It was important. I had to say it twice. They tend to be pretty simple. They tend to be kind of geometric or kind of like line drawings. And a lot of them, especially before the 20th century, were symbols for very specific spirits or gods. Although we also have ones for magical orders, for religions, for countries, like all kinds of stuff. And have frequently argued that sigils are a subset of magical images, but a lot of people have argued with me about that and think that I'm wrong. So I put it on my slide, and if you decide to not believe me, that's totally cool. I'm cool with that. But it is important to kind of like understand the difference between a sigil and an image. Sigils tend to be abstract. They don't tend to have the same sort of like emotional reaction or easily remembered nature that an image does. I mean, they're used so much by modern practitioners. They're used by chaos magicians and spirit workers. They're used by people who do angel and demon work. They're used by, every secret society ever. So they're very common. Images sometimes are cultural, and they sometimes are personally crafted, I guess, just like sigils. They can be part of existing systems, like astrological images, for instance. When you see artwork that depicts all the signs of the zodiac and has them painted with, additional things on them and stuff like that. Or when you have images of like the four cardinal virtues, where fortitude is wearing a helmet and all that sort of stuff. Those tend to be cultural images, things that we identify with a culture. Some really good ones, for instance, in the modern day, like in the United States, we have the Statue of Liberty and Uncle Sam, which are both images that are very closely associated with the United States. If you've seen the woman in Columbia Pictures, the image of Columbia is also an image that's associated with the United States. So images can be very cultural, but also a lot of them can be personally crafted. And a lot of them come from like astrological image magic. If anybody has ever read the Picatrix, it's filled with magical images that are perfect for adaptation and inclusion in memory palaces. So in magical practice, the use sigils and images kind of have overlapping uses, but one of the biggest differences, at least in modern magic, is the way that sigils are used by chaos magicians and in chaos magic, where they tend to be used to sort of like encode intent instead of things around a specific planet or a specific deity or a specific force, that sort. But one of the things that both symbols and images have in common is that they rely on both compressing and changing the representation of information. When you have something and create a sigil out of it, you are losing a lot of meaning to create something with a different meaning. And the same thing happens with an image. You are creating a mnemonic device that triggers a memory and a meaning for you and you alone. Now the output of both of these techniques is like truly occult in that the meaning is only available to those chosen to learn how to interpret and understand them, which is usually the practitioner who created them in the first place. But it does mean that they can be sort of combined and layered in interesting fashions. We'll talk a little bit about some of those fashions, using mnemonic techniques to create better sigils, using sigils to create better memory palaces. And I'm not an expert on hyper sigils, but I was sort of like, I should just throw that word in there. That's a good buzzword. But together they can be used in a type of like hyper sigil creation. First technique I want to talk about is enhancing a sigil with images. So this technique would be if you are practicing some sort of sigil magic and you want to give your sigil additional oomph. Now, I was inspired by this by Goetic magic, because in the Goetia you have these magical images of all of the various Goetic spirits. You know, they all have these descriptions. Stolas is my favorite. I think he's kind of adorable and ridiculous, but in the Goetic system, you already have images and sigils that kind of go along together, and you already are using them together in magic. So you can learn from that, and you can use sigils and images together in other approaches to magic, other types of magic. Especially if you're creating your own sigils, you can create your own image to go along with it. This is excellent because most of us are probably aren't like world-class artists. I always love looking through like really old grimoires, like, and really old spell collections like the PGM, and seeing like the goofy stick figures that magicians of ages past would write down. Because stick figures are easy and they are basically sigils, but they can represent more complex images. So this is sort of like, you know, if you ever create like planetary talismans where you have planetary sigils that you put on the talisman and an image that you keep in your mind as you're working with it, right? Like that's what this technique is like. This is I think, a very big departure from chaos magic, because classical chaos magic from the early 1900s talks about how you should, well, I guess not the late 1900s, the 1980s and stuff, talks about how you should forget what your sigils are for, which I think is really goofy, because how do you know if your operations are working if you don't know what the heck you're doing? Maybe it's a good excuse for stuff not working. So this allows you to be creating a complex image with a simple sigil attached to it. And the sigil can then be created in the real world while the image lives in a memory palace that is a library of, for instance, different magical images. The next, and this is a Benedict. I wish it would be. Sorry that it's not bigger. You can't really see what's going on. This is a Benedictine monastic memory image, which I believe illustrates like part of Luke. But if you look up close to it, you can see that it has these various images. You're supposed to read this angel in a specific order, and it helps you remember the order of the book of Luke and the parables that are in the book of Luke, right? So you can like look on it, and it has all the various things that attach to it. I think the one on the bottom might be the fishes and bread thing, and I might be getting all this wrong. I don't know the New Testament very well, so don't yell at me if I'm wrong about that. So the memory figure, this is a technique that I rediscovered on my own when I first moved to Portland, and I was riding the bus through North Portland and trying to remember all the streets, you know, because there are no friggin' numbers up there. And I had created I discovered I could create this memory figure that would help me memorize the order that the streets were in, so I knew which bus stop to get off on. And then later on, I came across Mary Carruthers' book about monastic monastic memory techniques, and I was like, oh, somebody already invented this technique in the 12th century. I just rediscovered it. You can combine this with other image generation techniques, but it helps if you have sort of like like I said, they're a striking but otherwise blank figure. So for instance, like a generic angel. You look at the angel's various body parts in a specific order, so it sort of acts like a little miniature memory palace that's also an image. And then what you can do is you can keep sigils on this image. So the fixed locations are used to store the sigils in order, and it helps if you are trying to do a larger magical operation where you have many sigils that need to be combined together with a common theme. And again, these sorts of memory figures can vastly increase the size and storage capability of your memory palace, because you suddenly have like a little mini memory palace that you're keeping in your big memory palace, right? But also you can just use them on their own. You don't have to bite off. Don't bite off more than you can chew at first. Start slow. This next one, I called it the sigil spiked palace. I thought it sounded cool. I discovered this technique when I was using memory palaces to memorize Masonic ritual, where I was using like the same lodge room over and over again, and it was confusing. But then I was like, what if I have a sigil when I'm entering the lodge room in my mind that tells me which portion of ritual I'm memorizing, or which I'm doing. So basically, you can use this to as sort of like an indexing system in a memory palace, or maybe in larger memory palaces. As your practice develops, you can use it as a sort of card catalog, even. But it also allows you to reuse a memory palace for different purposes. So you can use the memory palace more than once. And then finally, and this is, I think, where combining sigils and memory palaces kind of really starts to shine, is when you create basically what I'm calling an enchanted narrative, which is basically like an initiation that is a memory palace. And this can be a combination of things in the real world and things in the imaginal world, but it would be a way for you to share an operation with a group where there are shared images and shared sigils that all of you are working on. It can be a way to signify important places along an initiatic journey or in a sacred space. So you can have a sigil that is, for instance, secret to your group, that is intended to trigger the recollection of an image that your group has built together, that you have built for the group. This is an excellent way to encode long form spell work and to create these sort of narrative spells that others can then use to duplicate work that you have done. I know these techniques got very large and big scope all of a sudden, but if you are looking for ways to combine sigils and magical images, you're probably looking for a larger working, or something that is bigger than just a sigil. Okay, next. If you've ever taken tarot classes from me, you've probably come across this technique. We're getting away from sigils now, and we're going to talk about divination. Divination and memory tend to work together fairly strongly and fairly nicely. Like when you are encountering a divination system, let's say you're trying to learn tarot or you're trying to learn astrology, you are being confronted with a whole system of images and symbols that have meaning associated with them. And a lot of times these meanings are old and complicated and built upon for centuries or sometimes thousands of years. And memory palaces, it turns out, are the perfect way to do this. And this is not new. This is old. This is something that, like, astrological memory palaces are as old as astrology. We have examples of them. We have paintings of them. We have artwork of them. We have poems about them. Like astrology and memory palaces and astrology and mnemonic systems are like very, very closely interlinked. Now, tarot, of course, is a much younger and newer divination system, but it turns out that it too has been used already in sort of like symbolic and imaginal ways of divination. For instance, if you have ever practiced path working on the Tree of Life, many of the path working techniques that are used basically involve creating an image of a tarot card in your mind and then stepping into it and interacting with it. So you can take your divination system encode it as images. And I will argue that encoding it as images is going to be far better for your practice than rote memorization. Because remember, as you are creating images and incorporating these images into your memory palaces, you are incorporating feeling and sensation and all of the things that can ensoul an image and make it more meaningful and more personal to you. The same works with tarot. You know, tarot is basically laid out in a way that it makes sort of an imaginal memory palace, and so you can use that. Another thing you can do with this is you can use the images that you store in your memory palace or in your divination palace in the mind, and combine them in ways that allow you to store what their interactions mean or what their interactions seem to mean. And as you get better at it, your memory palace might expand, and maybe your tarot memory palace will have a separate room or a separate wing of the palace for every one of the cards, which means that in those wings or in the, you know, through those portals, you can encode your own personal learned meanings of every card, every astrological sign, or things like that. A memory palace and an imaginal memory of these divination systems is going to be it's something that you can explore and interact with by allowing the images to move, by allowing the images to sort of develop on their own. You're basically like ensouling the divination system that you're using. Okay, and then this last slide, it came upon me in a fit as I was sort of finishing up. This isn't the last. So there's this technique that's taught in a number of modern magical schools and possibly older ones called the astral temple. And the astral temple is based on a very, very old idea that our soul inhabits more than just the material world. Our soul stretches up to the divine. It inhabits the astral world itself. Astral, of course, meaning the stars. You know, the sphere of the moon and beyond. There's this great passage in Book 2 of the Corpus Hermeticum that talks about sort of how to explore and send your soul into the astral, which says, grow to immeasurable size, be free from every body, transcend all time, become eternity, and thus you will understand God. Suppose nothing to be impossible for yourself. Consider yourself immortal and able to understand everything, all arts, sciences, and the nature of every living creature. Become higher than all heights and lower than all depths. But it's before I read and really understood this passage, I had learned this technique when I was going through some Golden Dawn teachings. And the method of entering your own astral temple is one of sort of like meditation visualization thing where you you finish setting up your sacred space, you finish opening your own ritual space, and then you visualize yourself growing larger and larger and larger. The earth shrinks beneath you, the solar system shrinks within you, you grow beyond the solar system, you grow beyond the galaxy, you eventually grow beyond the universe until all of the cosmos is just like a tiny spark within you. And then you open your eyes and you look around. And then there you build your astral temple, and in that astral temple you can use it for ritual and things like that. But the astral temple itself tends to be like a piece of architecture or a place that you can like explore in your imagination. And as such, it kind of ends up acting a lot like a memory palace. But what I've discovered through playing with this is that astral temples and memory palaces kind of like overlap. So you can use your astral temple as a memory palace, but you can also use a memory palace as a temple space, which means that inside a memory palace, you can perform ritual. You can when I said vision quests. What I meant by vision quests is like you can do those sort of like path working meditations with the tarot. You can walk into unknown areas that you have not yet created in your memory and see what shows up, which is a form of scrying or maybe even like far seeing. The astral temple itself can be used as a memory palace, a place to store magical images and interact with them, a place to interact with like god forms and things of that nature. It's a space that needs a lot of exploration and I think some more development. But once you start using an imaginal memory system to create magical images, interact with them, store sigils and images, and then create also through ritual like physical magical objects that have your sigils on them, I think you're going to start experiencing the astral temple as something that is much more useful and powerful for, enchanting everyday life, I suppose. All right, well, that is my second to last slide. My last slide just says thank you. I would love to hear questions, thoughts, comments, criticisms. No firebombs, spitwads.
I was just letting the people online know that on June 26th,
Oh yeah.
Discuss building the astral temple.
Yes, my next class will be on building the astral temple. Which is
there is a question online. I cut out during the 3 things before narrative enchantment.
Narrative enchantment. So let's see, where was that? Narrative enchantment. Bloop, 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 bloop. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Not there. Not there. This? Oh, this. The sigil spiked palace. Well, with this slide, I was talking about a way to use sigils to expand a memory palace by allowing the sigil to sort of like allow the reuse of a memory palace, or sort of like an indexing system.
It says the slides before this too.
This one?
Is that the one? I think that must be the one.
Okay. The memory figure is a Benedictine mnemonic, and it is used as sort of a miniature memory palace where you have kind of like a striking figure. You store smaller images or sigils around the figure in a predetermined pattern, and then you can use that figure in a larger memory palace to increase the amount of storage, or you can use it on its own as a small, easy memory palace. Yes.
Jazz has a question.
Okay.
Can you expand on your statement about chaos magicians around the 1980s concept of forgetting sigils, and maybe talk about why this isn't something that's abstract?
Yeah, I'm going to mess up the name. It was either Phil Hine or Peter Carroll who wrote. I mean, they both wrote books on chaos magic in the, I think, the 70s and 80s, and a lot of their techniques involved sort of like charging the sigil and sending it out into the world and then forgetting it, and I think that that's goofy, because one of the things that you try to do as a magician is become more effective. But if you're forgetting what you're magicking for, then how do you know if you're getting any better at it? And also, if I'm putting a lot of work into something, I'm probably going to remember what it is. It's a lot of work to forget when you are, imagining and working on something.
And there's a request to see the slide right before this.
Okay. This one. Is it just because people want to look at Stolas because he's real cute? He's got. Yeah. Any questions from you guys here in the shop? Yes.
Yeah, are there any books or other resources that you recommend?
I think one of the ones that I enjoyed a lot is Mary Carruthers' book called The Medieval Craft of Memory. It talks about the that's where this image comes from, or I mean, she talks. Actually, there's a whole slew of memory images pre-made in there. There are memory alphabets in there, but you can kind of get like a really good idea of how things were used and how all of that stuff went together, which can really help inspire your own practice. I also think if you get Scott Gosnell's translation of De Umbris Idearum, or On the Shadows of Ideas, it's dense and it's weird, but it's like one of those books where you read it and sometimes Bruno's ideas will just sort of like make sense. And you'd be like, oh shit, this makes sense. Won't happen every time, but sometimes you read Bruno. That the translator is Scott Gosnell. The author is Giordano Bruno, and the book is On the Shadows of Ideas.
Is it Memory Champions? Is that the YouTube?
I don't remember. I came across those videos a really long time ago, but you can just look it up, like memory championships. Like find people who have, won memory championships, and a lot of them have YouTube videos where they talk about how they did it. Oh boy, that is a good question. Okay, so hold on. So, okay, so let me go back. So Jasmine asks, in the Serpent Icons book, they want the practitioner to forget the rituals. Do you feel similarly about this as you do about forgetting sigils? I don't know what the Serpent Icons book is, but
Serpent Icons is a deck. I've still got a couple left, but it's a sorceress distortion of the tarot in yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds cool. I don't know enough about it to comment on it. I do know that I've been in a lot of rituals with a lot of people, and feels like everybody forgets the rituals, and I find it annoying. Yeah. Let's see. Can the memory palace be made entirely from a visualized location instead of a place you've been in? Yes, absolutely. I did talk about that a little bit. I think it's tougher. Like if you want to get started, it's easier to use a real space, but once you get the hang of it, you can make imaginary spaces and made up spaces, of course. Let's see. And then you mentioned these kinds of memory practices being connected to divination. You also mentioned the idea of memory recovering from the divine. Can someone use these practices to remember the future? I would say try it and see. I am not going to be recorded saying that it's possible for anybody to see the future. Like, can we see the future? Is the future set in stone? Is the future real? Is time real? Time might not be real. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea of anamnesis, is that as your soul gains more and more knowledge and more recollection, you approach the knowledge of the divine. And divine supposedly has knowledge of all things past, present, and future. So sure, maybe.
Okay, they talk about that.
Yeah. Anybody else? More questions? Yes.
Would you feel comfortable describing some of your personal magical practices and how they relate to this?
A little bit, I could do that. I think that one of the things that I find the most helpful is using memory palaces to memorize ritual, because it encourages me to incorporate the symbols and images of my practice into my memory, right? And memory is part of the perception of the soul. So when I memorize ritual, I don't memorize it by just repeating it over and over until the words stuck in my head. I memorize it by analyzing it and turning it into a sequence of images and using those images to sort of power the ritual that I'm doing. I think that's one of the best ways to start, I also use, I use the combination of sigils and images when I make planetary talismans. The images that I am using or creating for planetary talismans are nowhere near as complicated as what I can actually carve onto something. So I create a sigil for it, and the image lives in the memory. Yeah, I think those are probably the two easiest ones. The astral temple, I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next class, but I mean that I started connecting that with memory palace work pretty early on when I first learned it. So, I think that's also part of it. Yeah. Does that help a little bit?
Could you elaborate a little more on using sigils as indexes to stack different sets of information on the same number?
Yeah. So like one of the first memory palaces that I created was Masonic. And a Masonic lodge, like you can maybe put like 15 to 20 locations in one. But if you're memorizing like a long lecture or even a medium-sized lecture, you need way more than that. You need like 30, 50, 60 locations. So that's more than one room. That's more than one lodge room. So I discovered that what I can do is I could index it by having like a sigil on the door that would sort of be in sequence, that would sort of be like, oh yes, this sigil represents this section of the lecture or this section of the ritual. So when I enter this room, I am entering the version of this room that has that section of the ritual. Does that make sense? Okay.
You mentioned that memory palaces could be shared. Like, were you talking about like the location, or were you talking about like the contents within?
Both actually.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons that I would recommend Mary Carruthers' book is that she shared. Well, I mean, here's the slide right. This is an excellent example. This is a shared memory palace, right? This is the image that you're supposed to memorize, all of the images that go along with it, and then on this page there'll be like this image corresponds to Luke 4:12. This image corresponds to like Luke 6:9. So this is an example of a shared memory palace.
Got it. Okay.
Memory alphabets can also be shared. So like the memory alphabet page that I showed, like those would be things that would be sort of like spelled out or drawn out in charts and then taught and memorized. But also like ritual experiences are in a way shared memory palaces. So if you go through an initiatory experience, the same one that thousands of other people have gone through, you are entering into an interaction with your memory that is encoding things in your memory that is a shared experience.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Which also, the memory figure really reminds me of the note-take, Ars Note-take.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like a pre-template or a post-template.
It was around the same time.
It's an interesting way of how you described it with him, just there as the shared template on the astral, which essentially the Ars Note-take was for education as well as your own practice and absorbing that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They are absolutely part of the same practice.
This one certainly resonates in that same frequency. It's really interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think, is that about it? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, online attendees. Thank you, in-person attendees. It's Mercurialia, so you should buy books and say, Mercury, I'm committing commerce for you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.